Good afternoon, dear presidents of European foundations, dear former member association with President Hans-Gert Pöttering, dear participants, dear speakers in this event, which we call The Future of Europe Starts Today, which is part of 3 activities that we are doing today all together here. And also online with our colleagues that are connected through the Zoom platform, which is about the future of Europe. So we have had, we have inaugurated together a little exhibition that we have on display in the historical archives of the European Union on, let's say, the past. On the past visions for a future, either coming from the different foundations, but also from the many collections we have here in the historical archives, and that are proof of the visions that we had for a joint and united Europe. So this afternoon, we will reflect more on the future of Europe in the frame of the conference on the future of Europe. And I'm very pleased to welcome all the various speakers and to have a very rich debate this afternoon. So I will moderate this session and we shall start with a short video message from the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, who became President on 18 January 2022 after the very sad death of former EP President Davide Sassoli. So we have a video message, and in fact, I just invite the technicians to launch the video. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Let me start by saying how honored I am to be addressing you at this important conference. A conference, may I say, with an especially appropriate title. Dear President Pöttering, dear President De Hoes, dear colleagues, friends and participants. Our European project is unfinished. Over the years, we have weathered together many storms: financial, environmental, social, health, political, and recently also geopolitical. They have all led to painful lessons, lessons that we must learn. The Conference on the Future of Europe is a unique opportunity for us to be honest about Europe. Honest about our failings, but also honest about our successes. And we have had a few of those. Our achievements can be seen through our economic engine, the world's largest single market, through our values, our citizens' rights and protections, our innovation, our food quality, and our environmental standards. But above all, the most important success story is the one that stood from the beginning. Because even when faced with Putin's aggression, our Europe has stood firm and united, marking itself as a true beacon of international diplomacy, peace, and security. These are our successes, and now is the time to build on them. I welcome the contribution of the former Members Association to the Conference on the Future of Europe. Their expertise, experience, and institutional and political memory will serve as important and unique perspectives towards building a stronger, more united Europe. In this endeavor, let us also not forget those who are no longer with us, but whose legacy will forever be remembered in the story of European integration. And on this occasion especially, I honor the work and treasure the memory of my predecessor and friend, David Sassoli. This is our time of opportunity. Let's work together to complete our European project, for our predecessors, for us, and for our children. The future of Europe is today.
Now we will also show a short video message that was recorded various years ago at the 20th anniversary of the FMA, of the former Members Association, by President Davide Sassoli, so who sadly passed away on the 11th of January this year. So we'll listen to a video from David Sassoli. Thank you very much.
Il Parlamento europeo è la nostra casa comune, è l'istituzione che più di ogni altra ha un legame diretto con i cittadini, che ha il dovere di rappresentarli, ascoltarli, difenderli. Quando abbiamo assunto il nostro mandato ci siamo impegnati ad onorare queste promesse, a rispondere in modo forte alle esigenze e alle preoccupazioni degli europei, in un periodo di sfide epocali che hanno alimentato un diffuso senso di smarrimento. Lavorare per l'Europa è un processo continuo che non si esaurisce con la scadenza del nostro mandato. Per questo oggi voglio ringraziarvi per il vostro impegno continuo, la vostra passione, la vostra dedizione, che non si sono fermati con la fine di una legislatura. La difesa dei nostri valori fondanti deve essere perseguita ogni giorno. Vi ringrazio perché la vostra attività contribuisce a rafforzare quel senso di comunità, quell'impegno costante di cui abbiamo bisogno per rendere le nostre democrazie più forti, più solide e pronte a rispondere alle richieste dei nostri cittadini.
Thank you very much. After these two video messages to start this conference, I'm now pleased to welcome Renaud de Hoes, who's the president of the European University Institute since 2016. And in fact, we're hosted today with this conference at the European University Institute. Our historical archives of the European Union is a member of this institute since 40 years. So please, Renaud de Hoes, your welcome words.
Thank you, dear President Pöttering, dear former members, dear friends. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all at the European University Institute today, and to kick off the interesting discussions that you will have this afternoon. There is no, let's say, no need for me to underscore that we live in a dramatic period, a period in which, let it be clear, war, which we thought had disappeared from the European continent, has reappeared, and equally importantly, has reappeared in a direct offensive, which is not only a geopolitical offensive, but also an offensive against the European model of liberal democracy. For that reason, it seems to me that it is extremely important for the Europeans to, continue and strengthen the work that has been undertaken 70 years ago. I now hear references to a European defense and things that even months ago, weeks ago, could seem extremely far-fetched. And yet, it seems to be clear to everyone that, at the very least, we need to talk about topics of that kind. The Conference on the Future of Europe is a wonderful opportunity to do so. It was not created for that purpose only, but also to further consolidate the European model of liberal democracy, which is in need of protection, which we know has been challenged in recent times from various corners, and not only outside of our union. So all this to say that today's reflection is extremely timely, not to say urgent. The conference was first hijacked by the COVID pandemic. There was, even in the first days after the launch of the Russian offensive in Russia, an impression that it could also be hijacked by the war. I think it would be a mistake. It is really important to continue the work that has been undertaken and to listen to the voice of citizens, which is one of the important aspects of that exercise, but also to the various contributions that are tabled on this occasion. It's clear to everyone, I think, that our union is certainly a remarkable political innovation, but it's also clear that it needs to be completed, it needs to be perfected. We at the European University Institute are very proud of the opportunity which we are given to host this discussion, not only to revive the extremely active partnership which we've had with the former members association for a number of years now, but also because we view it as one important aspect of our own mission, which is to contribute to debates on the construction of Europe. So I really thank you, all those who were able to join us today and those who are with us online for having accepted to take part in this joint event, and wish you all an extremely interesting and stimulating discussion. Thank you.
As you may know, the European University Institute is a joint undertaking between the cities of Florence and the cities of Fiesole. So I'm very much pleased to welcome today Anna Ravoni, the mayor of Fiesole, who will say a few welcoming words to this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm sorry, but I speak a little English. And so, but I think that it's important I read a little text in English. I would like to thank the former Members Association and the European University Institute for organizing today's event dedicated to the extremely important theme of the future of Europe. As I am here as the representative of the city of Fiesole, home of the Institute for over 40 years, I would like to underline the importance of this theme for both the citizens of Fiesole and the local institution who play an important role in the relationship between citizens and Europe. I believe it is important that the European Union maintains its role as a political, economic, and social guide. It is essential that local and territorial agencies for all levels are involved, including the regions and the municipalities. In this way, I think, we can guarantee a better integration of our citizens and bring them closer to the notion of Europe, which today may seem distant to them. Let me explain better. Let's go at this important analysis and study, the conference on the future of Europe, which began on May 2021, on the May past, and will be concluded in the coming months. There have been many fundamental and important studies and papers with contribution that will have a concrete impact on the future. But to what extent are our citizens informed about this? I had a quick survey with the elected member of our town hall, people who have a vested interest in the political life of our territory. I discovered that none was aware of this conference, nor had anyone read the literature emerging from this conference, which address issues of interest to all our lives. So, if the local members are not updated, I think we can conclude that our ordinary citizens are even less so, and consequently do not feel involved. When David Sassoli visited the Institute nel 2019, 2 years ago, I was able to address this specific usage with him. He told me that this was an important concern for him too. And we talked about the need to encourage citizens to participate in decisions which influence many aspects of their lives. It is not enough to vote once every 5 years when there are elections. Their commitment and their participation are neither immediate nor obvious. We need to find a way to track their involvement and the greater interaction with the European institutes. We have talked about this with the President and the Secretary General of the Institute, and I'm sure more here than in other districts, as we have the good fortune to have the Institute in Fiesole, and we have been able to dialogue with our citizens, involving them in themes of general importance. Unfortunately, the pandemic has been an obstacle to this, but we must be ready to start again and to once again be present in meeting places such as association, clubs, as we are doing nel 2018-2019. It is with this awareness and this hope that I thank you for being here to consider together the future of Europe. I am even happier and prouder for it be to Fiesole and Florence to send out such a strong signal of belonging to the idea of Europe, both as a territory and as a citizen. Excuse me for my bad English.
Thank you very much, Anna Ravoni. We will pass now to the opening of this conference, and I will give the floor to Hans-Gert Pöttering, former President of the European Parliament, now President of the Former Members Association, and also the Chair of the FMA Reflection Group. Floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Director Schlenker, President de Hus, Signora Sindaco, Anna Ravoni, Mayor of Fiesole, dear presidents of the foundations of our European parties, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. In the board of our Former Members Association, and the Vice President, Monica Baldi, is here, and some others as well, we decided to make our contribution concerning the conference on the future of Europe. And we decided a paper the beginning of December, and we had the help of Professor Van Hecke, and I'm very thankful for that, and he is here, and Monica Fasoni as member of our reflection group, and some colleagues we see on the screen. I want to welcome them as well. We decided on our paper in the beginning of December last year. And now we are in a situation that we have war in Europe. We have war not in the European Union, but we have war outside the European Union. And the dictator in the Kremlin attacked the people of Ukraine. And this makes clear what the European Union means. There is peace in the European Union. We are living on the basis of the law, although we have many challenges and problems, but we solve our problems on the basis of law, on the basis of our treaties. But outside the European Union, when we look to this terrible war of Russia against Ukraine, we see the relations are not based on a treaty, are not based on law. And so we should appreciate more, as we did in the past, the value of the European Union, because the European Union guarantees peace. And we as Former Members Association thought that our expertise, experience, and institutional and political memory, that we should make a contribution to the conference and to the future of Europe. And we think that the conference should concentrate on the broad questions how we could make the European Union more efficient, increase the capacity to act and deliver what citizens expect. And we see it especially now how important, and I will come to that later, security and defense is. We have developed 5 general guidelines. First, our values and principles, and this is the dignity of the human being, freedom, human rights, democracy, peace, legal order, and of course, solidarity between the European people. Secondly, we discuss the question of capacity to act. Thirdly, we deal with the tools and means which are necessary to defend our values and interests. And fourth, to reconcile economic interest with social protection on the basis of a competitive social market economy and to involve the important questions of environmental and climate protection standards. Fifth, EU democracy, which should be strengthened on all levels. Madame Sindako, Signora Sindako, from the local level to the regional level, to the national level and to the European level. And we should have an understanding that everything belongs together. We are defending the European democracy on all levels. And now I'm coming very shortly to the 10 concrete proposals we make. First, the COVID crisis has shown that we need a European cooperation or maybe even parts of integration as our health is concerned, and we might even have a change of the treaty as far as health is concerned to meet better the challenges we have. Secondly, we must develop a genuine foreign security and defense policy of the European Union, and we need qualified majority in the Council when we decide on foreign affairs questions, and that we need to be more flexible, and that we need a political will to act as a European Union when we have to meet challenges as we see now. And we can be very happy that the European Union, in the case now of the war of Russia, of Putin against the people of Ukraine, that the European Union remarkably stands together. Then thirdly, I should mention another point. Now what we have to do very concrete is to strengthen the European pillar in NATO. And if you remember, the last American president, now with President Joe Biden, we have good relations. But it might happen in the future that the United States withdraw from Europe, that they don't defend Europe anymore. And if we are not prepared, then we are in a very terrible situation. And so we should use the time now to make the European Union stronger as far as foreign affairs, security and defense is concerned. And we need the means to defend ourselves. And once we are strong, then I think potential aggressors might not attack us. So we need to be strong. Third point is concerning our own resources. We should develop our own resources, and the EU should enjoy fiscal autonomy, and the European Union should be able to collect money on the financial markets by issuing bonds. And all these questions, own taxes, should be discussed in the next midterm review concerning the multi-annual financial framework 2021-2027. And I see Alain Lamassoure, he might go further into the details, if you allow Alain. The fourth question is digitalization. We need to fight cybercrime, and we need to do it together in the European Union. This is a new challenge. And fifth, this is very important. When we speak to young people, very often they don't know the history of Europe or the European Union. And I think it's especially with the new media, the social media, and I'm not, as an old man, not so familiar with it, but my political interpretation is the social media are very specialized. They go very much into the details, but we don't have the overall historic concept. And so it's very important that in schools and everywhere, we educate young people and tell them what has happened in the past and what could happen again in the present and in the future. And we see it with the war in Ukraine, that peace is not eternal, but that peace has to be defended. The sixth point is that we have to defend the rule of law. This is the most important. If we don't defend the rule of law in the European Union, how can we expect that countries outside the European Union, whom we ask to respect the law, could follow the law? So it's very vital that we defend the law in the European Union, because the law is the basis for the peaceful living together. Then the seventh point is that we need a European energy union, and we see it with the war now, Russia against Ukraine, how important it is that we Europeans in the European Union stay together as far as energy supply is concerned, and we should not be dependent on one or a few countries. So we need to develop a policy together. Then the eighth point is the so-called Spitzenkandidaten. That means that the European parties have the people on the head of the list, and we have to be open to transnational lists. And I see Elmar Brok there on the screen, and Enrique Baron Crespo. They might go further into the details as far as the Spitzenkandidaten system and the transnational lists are concerned. The ninth point is that the Council of Ministers has to be more transparent, and we should develop the Council of Ministers to a real visible body. And now we have the procedure that the European law is decided in the European Parliament, what is very transparent. In the hemicycle, the whole Parliament meets, and the decisions are not only taken in the committees. The preparatory decisions are taken in the committees, but then the final decisions are taken in the plenary. And we need the same thing in the European Council, that the decision should not only be taken in the specific committees of the Council and then it's law, but it should be transparent, in a transparent way, discussed in the plenary of the European Council. And the 10th point is the situation on the Western Balkans. And the war in Ukraine shows us how one country, and not only one country, Russia, China, Turkey and others try to influence the Western Balkan countries. And I think we should accept, as Europeans in the European Union, our responsibility that those countries step by step can become member of the European Union. They have to do their homework. We have to do our homework. And so step by step, those Western Balkan countries have to join the European Union. And my last word is, and I'm coming back when I started, we should be clear and say it very convincingly and decisive and resolute. The Ukrainians, our friends, European friends, our partners in Ukraine, must have the perspective to be one day member of the European Union. They belong to the European family. They are part of our Europe of values, and we are thinking of our neighbors now in Ukraine. And let's do everything what is possible in our capabilities, that we defend them and give them not only moral support but economic support, and where it's possible, support with military equipment as well, that they can defend themselves. So we have a future together, we have lived together, and we have to defend our European values. And the former Members Association tried to make its very modest but very resolute contribution. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, President Pöttering. We will now turn to the introduction by two academic advisors, we may call. Stefan van Hecke first, who has been advising the FMA Reflection Group. He's at the University of Leuven and is specialized in the field and working often with the Parliament. So please, Professor van Hecke, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear presidents, dear honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back at EUI. I was here a visiting fellow some time ago at the Robert Schuman Center. So it feels a bit coming home. And I'm also very happy to speak here in front of the presidents of the European political foundations, because as an academic, I was the first, together with Wojtek Gagatek, a Polish scholar who did his PhD here at the EUI, to publish on what we then called the larger European political foundation. So the starting phase, the first 5 years. And then later on, I also published academically on the small European political foundations together with a Swedish colleague, Carl Magnus Johansson. Normally I have speaking points, but since the speeches will be published later on, I also prepared kind of a small speech. There we go. Enlargement is probably the best policy the European Union has ever had. It has brought with it peace, prosperity, security, and stability. When we talk about enlargement, let us not give poor excuses, because we know that we are never and yet always ready to enlarge. This is quite a clear statement, but it's not mine. It's a quotation, so I wonder who said it and when exactly. First, the timing. The statement takes us back to the end of 2006, so already 15 years ago, when the institutions were discussing the so-called integration or absorption capacity, adding a fourth, in a way, condition to the 1993 Copenhagen criteria, the accession criteria being the essential conditions all candidate countries must satisfy to become a member state, defined as the Union's capacity to absorb new members while maintaining the momentum of European integration. When preparing my contribution for this conference today about the future of Europe, I could not resist myself to think about the past of Europe, particularly this past of enlargement policy, especially since what has happened and is still happening in Ukraine, and the letter of application that was officially sent on the 28th of February, triggering one from Moldova, as well as Georgia on the 3rd of March, so very recently. Clearly, there is no such thing as a fast-track procedure. But at least at a more political, symbolical level, I think a gesture should be made. Why not grant these 3 countries the status of official candidate, as was proposed by the European Parliament's resolution on the 4th of March? These days, also in the framework of future enlargement of the EU, there's a lot to talk about geopolitics. Personally, I'm also convinced that the Union is at a turning point in its history, but let us not forget that perhaps the biggest success so far in terms of geopolitics has indeed been the EU's enlargement policy. And so therefore, I'm repeating this quote: enlargement is probably the best policy the European Union has ever had. It has brought with it peace, prosperity, security, and stability. When we talk about enlargement, let us not give poor excuses, because we know that we are never and yet always ready to enlarge. The author, by the way, is Alexander Stubb, then member of the European Parliament and rapporteur on the institutional aspects of the European Union's capacity to integrate new member states. Currently, Mr. Stubb is the director of the School of Transnational Governance at this institution. In the same way, I'm very happy that a proposal of the former Members Association to the Conference on the Future of Europe that just has been presented by President Pöttering has in its last concrete proposal a reference to the enlargement perspective for the Western Balkans. If we would rewrite it today, it would probably also make a reference to the so-called trio among the countries of the Eastern Partnership: Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. But more importantly, the recommendation also stipulates that it can be done only via a concrete and detailed roadmap, accompanied by a strict timetable. In this way, conditionality would be strengthened on both sides. Candidate countries would know what to do and when to do in order to become a member of the EU, while at the same time, member states would be encouraged to comply with the enlargement prospects they have agreed upon, and to strengthen the EU's integration capacity, especially in its decision-making process. End of quote of the proposal of the former Members Association. I was happy that as an academic, I could support the reflection group on the future of Europe. So thank you, President Pöttering, Elisabetta Funk, and also the members of the reflection group. The proposal that prepared the contribution of the former Members Association to the Conference on the Future of Europe. It's only a few pages, but worth reading, I think, because it includes some general guidelines that the EU should follow in developing its future politics and policies, as well as 10 concrete proposals, again, as President Pöttering just has presented them. Also, in the introduction to this proposal, the contribution of former MEPs reflects their expertise, experience, and institutional and political memory of the only institution that is directly elected by its citizens. I think this also perfectly fits with what has just been said by the current president of the European Union, Roberta Metsola. The future of Europe cannot be built without taking into account its past. In terms of turbulence and fast changes, it should be a relief and a reassurance to be able to rely on the political memory to steer the conference on the future of Europe. Before sharing some very brief reflections on that conference, allow me to briefly come back to the war in Ukraine. A lot has already been said, rightly so, about this whatever it takes moment, as President Metsola said in her speech on the 1st of March in the European Parliament in Brussels, before giving the floor to President Zelensky. Let me, in all modesty, try to highlight two more aspects. First, similar to the pandemic, the consequences of the war in Ukraine are felt by everyone, although not to the same degree, for sure, but especially when we look, for instance, at increasing energy prices all over the EU. I believe that in order to strengthen the support base for the EU's attitude vis-à-vis Russia, as well as the solidarity that we are witnessing everywhere, the burden of the conflict should be shared in proportional terms with regard to the member states, as well as to citizens. If the weakest shoulders have to carry the highest costs, then the EU will have failed. The consequences of the war also affect many different policy areas, again, similar to the pandemic. The challenge, not to say the need for a reset, is enormous with regard to energy and climate politics, agriculture with the increasing food crisis, justice and home affairs when it comes to the fight against cyber security, migration, monetary politics with the rise of inflation, budgetary and macroeconomic policies with the possible extension again of the general escape clause in the Stability and Growth Pact, and certainly the EU's foreign affairs. I quote again the proposal that is lying in front of us today, a genuine foreign security and defense policy, as referred so in the proposal, which has the title, Our European Union, Time to be Bold, to Act and to Deliver. It's also interesting that the reference to this genuine foreign security and defense policy comes immediately after a question related to the pandemic. And I quote, will the EU be better prepared when the next major disaster or crisis strikes, question mark, end of quote. Secondly, in having the future accession of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine now on our agenda, one should not forget, I think, about the so-called integration paradox. In the 1970s, in a way, when the British, the Danish, and the Irish joined the then European community, it was fairly easy, given the fact that these countries had very much in common with the original 6 founding members, and also the community at that time was not as developed as the Union is today. Currently, we ask much more to countries that have much less capacities and resources. This is the paradox, I think. Helping them preparing for enlargement without giving any concessions in terms of rule of law and democracy, etc., should be a priority. Why? In order to support the politicians in the countries involved that still favor a true reform agenda, as well as to support the younger generations in these countries that want to belong with us. To conclude, some final reflections about the conference on the future of Europe. After all, a bit the reason why we are here today. I wrote a SWOT analysis when we started our works in the reflection group on the future of Europe. And I want to take of the strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunity, each one which I think is still very valid. The strength of this conference Next to many other things is certainly the digitalization. The conference can benefit from increased developments in this area, broader participation, etc., something we have never seen before. One weakness. What should the conference decide about? After all, the youth policy agenda has already been decided in the short term by the Parliament and the new Commission, as well as in the long term with the dual transition to a green and digital Europe and climate neutrality by 2050, next to the geopolitical agenda. One threat for the conference: expectations delivery gap. The conference might oversell and underperforms, especially when the Council, the Member States, have the final word. This is a typical problem at all political levels, but certainly also at the EU. And then finally, one opportunity. Thanks to the war in Ukraine, the conference can help to close the gap between what citizens and the Parliament wants versus what the Member States want or are able to deliver in the area of foreign and security policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor van Hekke. We will hear now Franka Faisal, who is a PhD candidate at the European University Institute and who is very much engaged in European affairs at our institute as member of the Ponte Europa group of young researchers. Please, Franka, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dieter. Thanks for the kind introduction. I'm very honored to be here today and to speak in front of the European Parliament's former Members Association and its president, as well as the presidents of the different European parties' foundations. And I'd like to share with you some thoughts on the theme of today's event. So it seems to me that the future of Europe starts today really captures the so-called zeitgeist of Europe at this point. I would say it's an ambiguous zeitgeist though, because it's frightening and exciting at the same time. Within 2 years now, we've been twice confronted with this general atmosphere and rhetoric that today we woke up in a different world, our lives are never going to be the same again. So that was for the first time in March 2020 with the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, and for the second time just now in February 2022 with the Russian war in Ukraine. And of course, we may not forget that the threat of a climate catastrophe is looming over our heads throughout all of this. Now, there's something already inherently scary about change and difference, right? And this is even more so where change seems to mean a less free and a less safe world, essentially. This outlook is especially unraveling for my generation of young Europeans, which in large part grew up to the future, looking to the future with excitement and confidence as something welcoming and promising that means well with them. And honestly speaking for myself, that feeling has been quite shattered quite sometimes or on several occasions during the past years. And yet, I would say that the many uncertainties of how to confront the challenges to our physical, our economic and our social well-being also come with a different and more distinctly positive kind of uncertainty. Like questions of where do we go from here, where do we want to go, and how do we get there, also imply that it's after all us who get to decide on it, like it's us who get to answer these questions. And this reveals in front of our eyes a distinct scope for design, or is the nice German word Gestaltungsspielraum, which is not quite translatable in one single English word. But in any case, there's the scope for design, and this has perhaps not always been so tangible in the past. So next to all reasonable fears about the future, there seems to be also an excitement for what I would call the prospect of democratic renewal. And this is in particular as regards the European Union and our lives together as European citizens. Now, in my PhD research, I'm working on how the concept of a so-called militant democracy is translating to the EU. So I'm reflecting a lot about what legitimizes the defense of democracy to begin with. And it's actually in this idea of democratic renewal that I perceive a distinct link between democratic self-defense on the one hand and the reform of political institutions, such as the EU's on the other hand. Because it's only via democratic processes, really, that such reform can be legitimately realized. So the reason why we should stand up for democracy today is not a perfect democracy to be, nor a perfect democracy to come. Instead, we should defend present democratic rights, procedures, and institutions, because together they give us the very possibility to rethink and adapt those same rights, procedures, and institutions to the demands of our time. And it is only through democracy as the political practice of justice, as it was called by a German philosopher, that we can get there in a legitimate way. And it is therefore crucial that democracy, on all the levels that it takes place in Europe, becomes visible and tangible for European citizens. That they sense that they are living in a democracy, but also that they are themselves living democracy in their everyday lives. And this notion of living democracy is one of the key virtues of the Conference on the Future of Europe, in my view. As was said already by Dieter, I was involved in the Conference on the Future of Europe as a note taker for the citizens panel in Florence that took place in December, where the citizens discussed on democracy, rule of law, values, and security. And in the feedback round of our working group, there was an Italian citizen who said that the most marking experience for him at this conference was to see how the recommendations they produced were really a genuine joint or common product. How each and every one of the citizens was needed to get there because each of them knew something different about the topic, brought in a different perspective, because there were sometimes opposing views which had to be balanced. And all of this was to come to a final text which everyone could accept. So I was listening and sitting there and thinking, well, essentially what the citizen is describing is democracy itself. And later in the plenary session, after the citizens had voted on their recommendations, there was a Belgian citizen who expressed it even more clearly. So she said that the Conference on the Future of Europe was the first time she experienced democracy aan mijn eigen leef, which is Dutch and translates probably into something like, I felt democracy on my own body, or I physically experienced it. And I was very moved by these words. So my genuine hope is that the citizen participants, but not only them, like all who are involved in the Conference on the Future of Europe, will spread the message coming from this that European democracy is a living thing. It's real. So at the same time, because of that, I think that the COFI is currently at a critical juncture. Because if there would be no dedicated and transparent follow-up to the citizens' recommendations, there is a serious danger of disillusioning them. So what Professor von Heckes mentioned, maybe the expectations delivery gap. And this is even more so that for the first time now, there seems to be this timid notion of democratic ownership for the European project that is developing, and even only amongst a small group of citizens. So I can only urge European leaders not to quash this, really. Now, the words of the Belgian citizen about experiencing democracy on her own body are still echoing with me today. While I was really euphoric, or one might even say democracy drunk, immediately after the panel, I have come to perceive her statement in a slightly more differentiated light. Because at the end of the day, it's also worrying when a middle-aged woman, an EU citizen, and a citizen of a democratic state says that this was the first time she experiences democracy. So the lesson I'm drawing from this is that we need democratic deliberation really everywhere in the EU, and above all, we need it on a more, let's say, ordinary, day-to-day basis. And this is one of the goals we are pursuing with Ponte Europa, which Dieter already mentioned, which is a researcher-led civic engagement initiative at the UI. A few days ago, we've launched a project called EU Talks, together with the University of Florence and Europe Direct. So over the course of the next 6 weeks, there will be students of EU law and politics from the University of Florence who will be deliberating in 4 roundtables on the future of European policies in several areas. And they will be expressing their ideas in position papers, which will also be shared on the digital platform. So indeed, there's a lot of potential in this digital reform, also for participatory democracy at the EU level, as mentioned by Professor van Hecke. And in a few days from now, we have another project where we replicate the Conference on the Future of Europe in kind of a mini format with 2 high schools from Florence. So we'll give them material, the students will come together, they will deliberate, and they will get just not only a sense for Europe, but also a sense of what it means to engage in democratic processes. So in that sense, the future of Europe indeed starts today, or in a few days from now for the school project. It needs to start today, and that also, as also you, Mr. Pöttering, said, it needs to start on all levels, really. Above all, it needs to be through democratic processes here and now that we're heading towards a more democratic future. And therefore, each and every one of us should think about how they can become an amplifier of the message that the democratic renewal of Europe is, despite all uncertainties, a very exciting prospect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franka. Now we turn to the next group of participants and of speakers today, the President of European Party Foundations. So I would like to invite first Mikolas Dzurinda, the President of the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies and former Prime Minister of Slovakia, to give his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Director, for giving me the floor. Dear Mr. President, dear Hans-Gert, my dear colleagues, friends, at the beginning, I would like to congratulate the European Parliament Former Members Association and the Historical Archives of the European Union for preparing this conference. And thank you very much for being invited. At the beginning, I would like to express my warm wish and to share my conviction with you, telling that I strongly believe that the EU should shape itself into an authentic federation based and developed strictly and rightly, consequently, on the subsidiarity principle, as Hans-Gert Pöttering has described a while ago very, very precisely. I try to illustrate this principle a bit concretely. Political leaders should not meddle in how families educate their children, how EU states maintain their traditions or cultivate their cultural national identity. We need to protect our European cultural diversity, not to harmonize or unify it. Let us, however, identify those areas which no country can manage better on its own, and entrust them to common institutions of the EU, in particular foreign policy and defense, but also the fight against irregular immigration, protection of our European external borders, also the energy security, supply chains independence or contingency, plans for emergencies such as COVID-19 pandemic. Some people say that we need more Europe or an ever closer union. I'd like to say that we need as much union as necessary, but also as little union as possible. This is, by my mind, the right implementation of the subsidiarity principle. The competencies executed at both levels, the communitarian and national one, must be clear and respected. and both levels should refrain from interfering with each other. The EU should undertake a strategic decision in these days to create an integrated European defense force, which would focus on Europe's territorial defense, including cyber and space, but it could also be used for an out-of-area crisis management operations. This decision should be adopted immediately, not only due to the war of Russia against Ukraine, but also in the light of a major shift of the global political landscape, where the United States is increasingly occupied with China and the Pacific, and also due to its internal, let's say, political dynamism. A potential European army has to be a genuine European pillar of NATO. This will boost Europe's credibility as an actor and contributor to global security and increases its attractiveness to partners such as the United States or like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific. Hand in hand with this strategic decision, the EU needs to adopt another important step to change its decision-making processes in the field of foreign policy, to move on from the principle of unanimity to the qualified majority voting, making decisions quicker and more efficient. Well, I realize we also need to meet another ambitious goals, such as post-pandemic recovery, the complex transformation of the Green Deal, digitalization, and many others. It will mean additional expenditure under conditions of already heavily indebted EU member states. So it is obvious that our monetary and fiscal policy requires reform focused on creating new resources. But we have to transform the current financial sector in more sustainable one. One thing, dear friends, is crystal clear. We Europeans need to change our strategic culture. For decades, we relied largely on our soft power, the ability and will to strike a compromise, and on money. The Kremlin's war against Ukraine is a wake-up call for all of us. We need to build our resilience, hard power deterrence, and our ability to act united and decisively if needed. But there is an area which is even stronger than money or weapons. It is our values, principles, but also our determination, commitment, and ability to act under pressure. I strongly believe that we are ready and capable enough to defend our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Joinda. We're turning to Maria Joao Rodriguez from the Foundation of European Progressive Studies. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And this is with great pleasure that I'm joining all these friends. After a very interesting and good decision we have taken 3 years ago, when the former members association start meeting with the main European political foundations, and we concluded that we could do something together, also counting on the partnership with the Institute of European University European Institute here in Florence. And now we see the fruits of having taken this decision. By that time, our main focus was Conference on the Future of Europe. The outreach of this conference was not completely clear, but now we all see that this conference has a real high responsibility. And let me start by greeting the statement produced by the former Members Association. So President Pöttering, from our viewpoint, this is a very good document. We really support this document. And now let's use this moment where again meeting to reflect on the implications of the new situation we are confronted with war starting as it started in Ukraine. We all know that we are in historical times. And we feel that we are again dealing with this crucial dilemma of the European integration, which is in a certain moment to choose if we should go rather to deepening European integration or to enlarging the European Union. But somehow we also feel that we need to find a way to do both. Perhaps with different formats, but we need to find a way to deepen and to enlarge. And this is not easy. So we need to have a creative moment for the European project. Let me start by saying that our assumption in our Foundation of European Progressive Studies is that we really believe that we should move to a new phase of the European project. And recognizing that the European Union can no longer perceive itself as just a market or monetary zone. No, the European Union is most of all a political entity, deciding democratically on how should we move to our way of life in terms of economic, social, environmental, cultural policy, but also the way we deal with the world. And we cooperate with the world to improve global governance. So we need to recognize this. And I would say that the treaties we have now, and I think I have something about this because I was part of the team negotiation, the Lisbon Treaty. The treaties are not properly reflected this. And so we cannot have taboos. We need really to reassess the potential of the treaty. There is a potential to be used for sure of the Lisbon Treaty, but also possibly limits. And we cannot have taboos in a historical moment as this one. So I would say that if we recognize ourselves as a political entity, our first duty is to protect all those who are fighting for freedom and democracy and the rule of law inside of the European Union and outside of the European Union. And this starts with now welcoming refugees coming from Ukraine, providing all the entire protection they deserve. But this means that we should also finally build up a real European asylum system, something we could not deliver over the last years. Secondly, yes, we need to be a full-fledged external actor. So this means that we need to work for stopping this war, getting an agreement for peace. And we know that this depends on us providing weapons. This depends on us in triggering hard sanctions on Russia. This also depends on us to emerge as an important global actor. Right now, there is a decisive issue being dealt with, which is how will China behave in front of this conflict? And we know that if there is a full alignment between China and Russia, we do have a problem in global governance, because we'll have a major divide in the global governance and multilateral system. So it's an extremely serious situation. And I believe that even, of course, the American president is now very active dealing with Xi Jinping. Europe should also deal with China, because Europe has some leverage on China. So this is an example of the kind of global external actor we should be able to do. But this also involves our capacity on defense. And this week, we know this is a decisive week, because the strategic compass for defense will be hopefully adopted by the European institutions. And we know that it should also involve capacity on cybersecurity, the new dimension of war, which will become more and more important. But this also means that Europe needs to develop its own digital agenda. And we are also preparing major European laws to frame the European way for the digital transformation. And we need to have the autonomy, the capacity to adopt these rules and the standards for the digital transformation, without which we are not real sovereign. Sovereignty today depends a lot on mastering digital tools. All these things are at stake on the table this week and next months. Then, because of the war in Ukraine, we understood, I hope forever, that regarding energy, what is at stake now is not only to conduct this green transition, but also to build up a real energy union, to reduce dramatically our dependency from Russia. This is again a precondition for our sovereignty. And we need to move fast. But if you want to move fast, this is such a big change in our economic structures that there is a risk of increasing inequalities in Europe, inequalities between countries, inequalities between regions, between different groups. And so we need to pay attention to this, because if we want to meet this new challenge situation and build this energy union and a greener one, we also need to take care of the risk of social inequalities. And this means that we need to build up the necessary financial instruments. We learned something with the COVID, because in order to avoid a big recession, we were able to take this historical decision of strengthening European budgetary capacity. Now let's use this capacity, building on own resources and the common issues of debt, to move to the next objective, which is energy union with social cohesion. This will probably also involve update budgetary rules. Even, of course, we know that we need to have responsible national fiscal policies. We know this. Finally, all these can only happen, in fact, if we have this democratic renewal you were speaking about. We understand this very well when following the debate taking place right now on the Conference on the Future of Europe. Yes, we need to have a new political engine for the European project. The technocratic mode, I believe, is over. We need to have a democratic mode. And this means that, yes, the European Parliament should have stronger competences. Yes, the Council should move to qualified majority voting. But we believe that in order for this to happen, which means at least some target changes in the treaties, we need this new engine coming from citizens themselves. So that's why the Conference on the Future of Europe does have an important mission now. And we, around this table, we can, I believe, provide a valuable contribution because we are building up a kind of coalition of European actors which can bring expertise, experience, and therefore a qualified, plural, multi-partisan debate, which is really important to move forward for the next phase of the European project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Rodriguez. We will now turn to the first virtual participant. We have in the Zoom platform Hilde Woutmans, President of the European Liberal Forum. If you want to unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and hello, everybody. It's an honor to be with you, although I'm not there, but I thought it was a very nice conference, and I think the speakers already talked about the right things. I think, like Maria just said, historical moments like the ones that we're witnessing now do not happen often. Who could imagine the last 2 years would have played out like this? Who would have thought COVID would paralyze the entire world? Who would have thought there would ever be a new war in Europe? Freedom, peace, the value of human life are being challenged today. And I think we can say safety is not a certainty anymore. Our stability is now affected by various global factors, which are often out of our control. Today, the very basics of a coexistence are under threat. And I think the language of populism, propaganda, military aggression, economic insecurity, blackmailing have proven to be among the major factors shaping today's international power dynamics. And this contradicts to the liberal foundations of the European project, to the interests and the beliefs of Europeans. At such moments of increased tension, the future of the world is being decided. A better Europe can and needs to be born from this crisis. The future of Europe needs to be decided by Europeans. And the Conference on the Future of Europe was envisioned as an utmost instrument of direct democracy. Honestly, in my hometown, in Belgium, I always say this Conference on the Future of Europe is really our baby. It's the Renew Europe group in the parliament that really pushed this forward. So for me, it's really my baby, which I hope that will grow up to be a full European citizen. I think this conference is a chance for Europeans to pay tribute to democracy, express their opinions, engage in the debates, suggest their vision of the future, and make their perspective and aspirations heard and seen. This is our Europe-made vaccine against the evil of propaganda and dictatorship. And I agree with the 10 priorities of Hans-Gert Püttering. And also I agree with what Professor Steven van Hekke said. The most important thing of this conference is the delivery. And this weekend, I had a full table with all young Belgian people discussing this Conference on the Future of Europe. I asked them, what is for you the most important thing that Europe needs to do? And you know what? Those young people, they start putting water in the wine already before they put forward their ideas. I said to them, stop putting water by a wine before going on the table to discuss it. Because they were all saying, yeah, but is that possible? Will Orban accept? Will this pass? Will that pass? Well, no. I really hope that the outcome of this Conference on the Future of Europe will be very ambitious. There was, maybe that's too ambitious, was one of the young people that said, we should really abandon the Council. I don't think Charles Michel would like to hear that proposal. That is maybe too ambitious. But that's to tell you how the young people think and how they reflect. So I really hope, Professor Van Hekke, that you're not right and that we will fight to deliver on this conference on the future of Europe. And today I'm asked here to talk as the president of ELF. And you all know the European Liberal Forum, and like the other forums, I think the think tanks play a key role because they bring together voices from different corners of the continent, provide public platforms for exchange and discussion, and stimulate our search for common response. Without strong think tanks like ELF and other ones, the political world could not thrive like it does today. I think you all are important players in our decision-making process. And a lot of colleagues said it already this evening, today. Current developments in Ukraine are shaking and changing the world. I must honestly say, as a member of the European Parliament, I have seen Europe reacting like I never thought it could react. We were united, we were strong. It was really good to see that Europe can make that kind of steps forward. I really hope, and that's the message that I gave also to High Representative Borrell, I really hope that this we can keep, that now we can work further to abolish the unanimity rule, to make forward for a real European army, to really continue the fight for the rule of law in Europe, and not look, yeah, but they're helping with the refugee crisis, can we discuss it? No, we need to discuss the rule of law in European cities. So for me, this is really the moment. I think, and a lot of professors told it, that Europe is always born from crisis to crisis. I really hope that with this crisis, Europe really is born as a strong platform, a strong unanimity where we can work together and where we tackle all the challenges together. That's my wish. The future of Europe starts today and we must be ready for it. Thank you very much.
So it has already been said by others, but today, as we speak these words, we are witnessing not only a cynical attack on a country and its inhabitants, but also a brutal attack on the rule of law, democracy, and peace in Europe, the foundations on which the European Union was built. Ukraine has a right to freedom and democracy. It is our task to support the country and its people. Nobody can predict the future today, but one thing is certain. Only a more united Europe can confront the situation in an adequate manner, coordinating to the maximum the several efforts needed. Continued diplomatic efforts in the pursuit of a peaceful outcome are necessary. It is clear the European Union has to build solidarity instruments to support Ukraine. This is a context in which today we discuss the future of Europe. As the Green European Foundation, we agree on the direction of the key proposals of the former Members Association, more competencies for the European Union, a strengthening of the European Parliament, allowing it to develop strong policies that integrate economic, social, and ecological challenges. But from a green perspective, it is also clear that this goal cannot be reached within the existing economic model. It's already said today, we have also to confront some taboos. We have seen an economic model reinforcing social inequalities, a model being addicted to fossil fuels and having a growing need for raw materials extracted elsewhere in the world. And we all saw what happened with the latest IPCC report. Of course, it's very logical. Due to the situation in the war, it didn't get really the attention it deserved. So I would like to quote it, the last sentence of the report. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. Detailed IPCC reports over the last decades already made clear that energy policy is a question of ecological security. We now know that energy policy is also a question of geopolitical security. Nobody questions anymore the strategic necessity to be energetically independent from fossil fuels as soon as possible. But also increasing our autonomy in the field of minerals is necessary, building what you could call a social circular economy that fits again within the planetary boundaries. An economy that prioritizes the needs of everyone instead of the profits of economic actors. The failure to make vaccines worldwide available in the corona crisis showed that change is necessary. Just like we urgently need another agricultural model that protects nature while producing healthy food. So this all goes in the same direction, and for me, the key word is resilience. We have to build a resilient European Union. And to make the EU more resilient, we need more than an adjustment. It calls for a new balance between democratic steering and the role we give to markets, as well as opening room for citizens' participation and action. The corona crisis already showed the extreme vulnerability of an economy based on global supply chains, based on just-in-time production without buffers. 2 years ago, we discovered that we didn't have stocks of mouth masks and we were unable to produce them. Now we discover we privatized crucial installations for gas storages and didn't mind they were not full before winter. Meanwhile, many families wonder if they still will be able to pay their bills due to the cascade of rising costs, initiated by crazy energy prices, partly due to empty stocks. So resilience means more foresight, re-embedding markets in socio-economic norms, and also invest in other types of economic actors like the social and solidarity economy. The good thing is the ideas for change are there and citizens are providing them. It was already mentioned, and I'm very thankful for that, but I think a unique feature of the conference on the future of Europe are its citizens panels. I think it's the first time the European Union has its own experiment in deliberative democracy. And we had 4 citizen panels and they made 178 ambitious proposals, like for instance, independence from oil and gas imports, abolish unanimity vote in the council, a kind of minimum wage, stronger protection of the environment, transnational lists, and European investments in a better life quality. We have to embrace these proposals of the citizens. And in order to be able to implement the proposals, I think we need a convention. I can't imagine the European Council would not embrace the work of these great European citizens. As a Green Foundation, our goal is a more democratic, more resilient, more socially just and greener Europe. And I think we stand for a social ecological transformation comparable qua impact with the Industrial Revolution, where we reorganized our society on the basis of fossil fuels and centralized production. We are now on our way to a society running on renewable energies and a decentralized system. To make this a success, the European Union has to develop sufficient instruments and funds to make this transformation happen in a fair way, to ensure the fundamental rights of all guaranteed in an inclusive society. This goal of a just transformation, a just transition, needs to be supported by inclusive foreign and fiscal policy. The new economic model we need will include a fair and just taxation system and decent minimum wages. To conclude, I would say, we are faced with a difficult task to move fast forward without leaving anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Hollemans. We will now turn over to the debate with contributions from the former Members Association. And we open once again on the Zoom platform with Enrique Baron Crespo, former President of the European Parliament, also former President of the former Members Association. Please, Enrique, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the invitation. And well, my comment will be on the future needs overcoming the past. Since the calling of the Conference for the Future of Europe, we are overcoming major crises: the fight against the pandemic, the recovery of the economy with a common impulse, and in every case, after some doubts, the answer has been a major step forward, leaping from crisis to crisis with the méthode communautaire, deciding together, following the wise prediction of Monet. The instruments are building the health union, a next generation plan, doubling the budget and mutualizing the debt. Now, the dramatic war in Ukraine raises the major challenge, bringing us back to one of the major crises of the history of the European construction, the failure of the European Community of Defense in the French Assemblée Nationale in 1954. We were able to overcome this with the Treaty of Rome, and we are now celebrating the 65th anniversary of the treaty. But the debate is not more a theoretical one about the CFSP and the European sovereignty. It's about war and peace in our continent, just in one of the major scenarios of the Second World War, fruit of an internecine and massive attack of Putin's Russia to Ukraine, breaking with all the international law rules, causing havoc for a peaceful population, and trying to ignore the European Union. In the last month, we are taking major historical decisions to convert the European Union in a political leader, with Germany taking the most important political and budgetary decision on security and defense since the creation of the Federal Republic, and France asking for European sovereignty, reviving NATO with Sweden and Finland preparing the entry, and applying a common immigration and asylum policy. Moreover, the neutralization of Switzerland, making Japan to reconsider to its nuclear weapons policy, and getting an overwhelming vote of condemnation in the UN General Assembly of the Russian aggression to its neighbor, and the international repression on its own people critical of the war. This is an European and a global crisis. The conflict will be long and painful. We must build on the momentum of the impressive wave of European solidarity, giving the step forward of creating the European Union of Defense, adding to the monetary citizens union that we have been able to create. It's not only about our future, it's about peace in our continent and beyond in the world. The first phase of the Conference for the Future of Europe is coming to the conclusion under French presidency that has the responsibility to make a proposal for the next step, culminating the open-ended constitutional process that we are living. By a curious irony of history, it's France that has the responsibility of launching this major step forward that must allow us to overcome the failure of 1954. Now is the moment to consolidate participatory democracy through representative democracy, improving the system that we launched in the negotiations of the Maastricht Treaty, and with a new convention the index of the proposals of improvement is in the reality in front of us. Above all, we must be clear on one critical point. We will never accept to come back to the Europe of 1945 and its balance of power, fruit of havoc and arms, and not of the will of the peoples. We shall fight for preserving peace and the principles of values and that have allowed us to live the longest period of peace and prosperity in the history of Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Enrique. We have another participant on the platform. I give the floor to former member of European Parliament, Elmar Brok. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Hello. I'm a little bit jealous that I cannot be in Florence today, and especially this evening, but everyone has to pay his price. So let's make a few remarks. I have not to repeat all the wonderful goals and ideas which were already mentioned. And I can just say that the paper, which under the leadership of Hans Gert and Professor van Hegge are written, is a very good paper and could be a good paper for the conclusions of the conference itself. Because I have the feeling that a concrete conclusion is not yet ready, that even the institutions are not able, because of the behavior of the Commission and the Council, to come to real conclusions from which a mandate can be developed for real changes, not have just something, it's discussions with citizens without any results. If it has no constructive results, it's a missed opportunity, and it will not help the citizens which have to work so much in these discussions. In these days of Ukraine, we have to see that the old ideas of the European Union, never war again, never dictatorship again, is still the crucial point. To keep peace and freedom and make it strong. And that we should also explain stronger what it means to have a liberal democracy against the other systems. It is not clarified in the opinion of many of our citizens. Here we have to be stronger again. And when it comes to the economy, yes, the economy must be strong. She must be in a certain way independent in a global environment. I am for multilateralism, not to be misunderstood. But this question, not just on the military side, but also on the economic side, have a certain type of sovereignty of the European Union. It's an important question that especially the sins of the European Union, especially of the Germans, in this energy question, which is only one of the examples, show that we cannot continue that way. We need a competitive and fair, but also a competitive economy, which is sometimes forgotten in our debate. Let's make me a few remarks what has to be done in this conference. First of all, for sure we need reform. But we should not just look to the reforms with this change in the constitutional context and with treaty changes. This will last, with including the ratification, 5, 6, 7 years. And we do not have that time. We should go that road, but not alone. We have to look now what happened in Corona times and Ukrainian war times, how faster we can come to using the potential of the Treaty of Lisbon in decision-making, in competence, and some, many things else, which can be done without changing the treaties. And I think the best ideas are not productive if the European Union has not the instruments, the means to fulfill it. In the Constitutional Convention, we proposed to have more rights for the Commission in the time of a pandemic. That was said no by Berlin, by Paris and others, too much competence for the European Union. We lost in the time in the fight against the pandemic at least half a year because we had not done so 20 years ago. This should not be forgotten that we have to see that also in other questions. We have to look to the principles. For example, as the speaker before me, our good friend, has said it, that we have to look into the system. The supranational system of decision-making of the utmost importance. Because only then can be made legally binding decisions, laws, only then it qualified majority voting possible. This is the grand idea by Jean Monnet, where I have the feeling that many of the acting people today also in governments have never heard about what the difference is between the intergovernmental and the supranational way. This should be very much clarified again. And I think that I'm sure in the budget question, Alan will say more, so I have to keep it. I can leave it, but the control of the bureaucracy in council and commission is also an important point in that question. Now let me come to 2-3 main points. If we do not increase the possibilities of qualified majority voting, we will run into a disaster. The European Union is there successful where qualified majority voting is there. That is especially in the internal market. And is there not successful where we have the veto principle. We had done a lot of progress from Maastricht to Lisbon in increasing the numbers of foreign and from the single act even for the development of have more qualified majority voting. But in decisive questions, we have not yet. We're now talking, for example, about taxation. That to come to in this global environment, with these big American companies and others, to feel the possibilities of European taxation is of the utmost importance in certain questions of taxations. In other questions of the economy, it's important. But I think most important is that in these days of Russian war against a sovereign country, the qualified majority voting in foreign security and defense policy. Here we have needed a total, in practice, the total veto principle question. Even in resolutions in the council, it's a disaster. And we have many examples for that. Here I think we have to use the instruments by initiatives of the high representatives, by setting strategies by the council, and within that strategies, the foreign ministers can decide by majority. The possibility of the coalition of the willing, the means of the permanent structured cooperation. There's a lot of possibilities to go forward with that. And this argument, this cannot be done because then countries will be put into the corner. That's wrong. That was the same argument against the majority voting in internal market questions. It was stupid in that question at that time, and this is stupid now in this question. And here the big countries and the smaller countries have to find an understanding. In the European Union, it's for the first time in European history that the small and the big countries sit in foreign policy question at the same table. The same possibilities. In the past in which Mr. Putin lives, the big countries decided about war and peace. They decided about the frontiers, the borders, and they said who is in which field. This, after 1945, should have been finished by the European practice, by the successful European Union within the European Union, but above the European Union, by international law so often signed in the last decades about the sovereignty of nations and the territorial integrity. And to build this up is of the utmost important. But at the same time, you see also economic question as part of foreign security policy. Independence in energy and other questions is an important question, or diversification to make it possible to come out of such a crisis. The question is very clear that we come to better conclusions in trade agreement, which is part of foreign policy. Is in these days wise that we have no ratification of the Mercosur Treaty in the terms of policies, or should we leave Latin America because we do not agree with Mr. Bolsonaro in certain questions, leave Latin America to the Chinese or others? This have you to consider, to put that in a context. But the most important point in these days is defense. When I see what Russia does at the moment, with the goal to do more, even clear threats, what the membership of Baltic states or of Poland and so on is there, this is threats against Finland and Sweden, then it must be clear that we have to become stronger. Look, as we had the most important disarmaments agreements and arms control agreements, the 80s and 90s. The European Union and NATO were strong. The German defense budget, the German GNB was at that time 4%. Now it's 1.4%. 4% at that time, until 89. And that was the possibility to keep peace and our freedom. We have forgotten that in my country as well as in other countries. And here we now in such a situation where, because of our weakness, Ukraine is the victim of that. Irresponsible. We have to see that we talk a long time about it, that we need European synergy effects. The member states of the European Union spent more than 280 billion euros for defense per year. That is at least 3 times so much as Russia spends. And perhaps with the exception of the French army, no army in Europe is really ready to fight alone or together. The communication system we use European armies are not really existing. We have the production lines, which is like a handicraft, manufacture, where things are built and incredibly expensive. But everyone has a little bit different.
Elmar, I love you, but I have to leave in a second. So
yeah, I will be fast. And because I also to leave, but then I can listen to you. But what I mean is, we need in this question of development, planning, and procurement, production, a closer cooperation, come to the synergy effects. We have 160 weapon systems, the Americans have 30 weapon systems. And if we do not change that, we can pour so much money as possible into the military thing without any real success. And when I see, to make it short, in November, the Trumpists would win the American Congress back, then we are even more in a difficult situation. And therefore, this is the moment to give the European Union, not to give it, the European Union has to take its possibilities out of the Treaty of Lisbon, in qualified majority voting, in PESCO, in this cooperation with the defense budget and increase that, and many other questions to get the synergy effects that we can defend our peace and freedom. And we have to see also that the European Union must develop better possibilities that all parts of the European Union live in the same quality of security, including Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states. And here we have to become better. And here, this conference has to do more to force our European leaders to become practical and have not just wonderful speeches that they have listened to the citizens. Thank you very much.
So Alexander, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot. As a former MEP, I will take 2 minutes of your time. The following points. Number one, the EU advances only through crisis. Usually it's crisis, chaos, and suboptimal solution. It happened in the oil crisis in the 1970s, which led to the Single European Act. It happened in 1989, which led to Maastricht, Amsterdam, Nice, and Lisbon. Now we've had 3 collective crises which have hit us. The first one, the Euro crisis, second one, asylum, the third one, COVID. 2022 will go down in history as the biggest unifying moment that we have ever seen. We will move towards a truly common foreign and security defense policy. We will move towards the mutualization of debt. We will move to a new European security structure where Russia will be completely and utterly isolated. And on the other side of the new Iron Curtain, we'll have 30 to 35 states, some of which are members in the European Union, some which are in NATO. I think this is one of these huge moments in history, and one of those moments where Europe will seize the moment, advance, and become more federative, more democratic, more efficient than ever before. Final point, we are used to thinking about the EU as a regulatory superpower. I think we need to start thinking about it as an acting superpower, whether it's monetary, whether it's trade, whether it's health, whether it's asylum, whether it's foreign policy, defense, competition. The EU is back in the game. Thank you very much. And sorry, I have to leave. Salut, Alain.
Alexander, you are great.
Elmar, you're my hero. And remember, Elmar and I always do this when we meet. Let's do it, Elmar. 1, 2, 3. Boom. All right. See you guys. Sorry, I have to leave.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Alexander.
Thanks.
So direct response, Monica.
Yeah, I don't share that amazing optimism, but that's no news. First, I want to thank very much for this occasion. And also I am very glad that there are some possibilities and some practical example of cooperation among European Foundation. I think that that is very good and very useful. The European Green Foundation was probably the last one that was created, but I think as I was participating at that creation when I was president of the European Green Party, it has been a very, very precious instrument to enrich actually the thinking of the party and beyond. And I also very much hope that the cooperation among foundations will be also a major occasion of cooperation among parties, because the cooperation among European parties is very little since Mr. Mertens left us. This kind of cooperation has become very, very, very minimal. In the 10 years in which I have been president or co-president of the Greens, I probably saw a couple of times my colleagues from the EPP, 0 times my colleagues of the Socialist Party, and sometimes those of the Liberals. So I think that that is really an issue that is becoming more and more a political one as well, the capacity of cooperating among foundations, but also among parties. Now coming to the issue, I'm very glad that Elmar is talking a lot about the majority vote, because when I was trying to put it in very much into this famous very good 10-point text, that was not very easy to do. So I am very glad that this is emerging more and more as the main issue of the need of reforming of the European Union. And as far as I understand today, there are something like 19,000 proposals from the platform of the Conference of the European Citizens, and there are among this the 10 most important and most supported ones, there are at least 6 which are asking for getting rid of the veto. So I think that that is really something that is very important in order to make our European Union work better. And even if I agree that we have to do all we can to use all possibilities to make the European Union work, even without starting a very complicated EU reform, I'm actually of the opinion that only if the European Parliament will be able to take up the drive to reform that the Conference on the Future of Europe is putting forward, we are going to be able not to make of this conference, as Elmar said, a missed opportunity, because unfortunately we are very much under the possibility of having the conference as a missed opportunity. I fully agree on the idea of a militant democracy, but frankly, I believe that is much more important, beside having a militant democracy, also to have a delivering democracy. And this is the real problem, the connection between the capacity of having instruments of participative democracy with instruments that actually have an impact on the way in which decisions are taken. And according to me, the only way of dealing with it is by having the European Parliament opening a major reform process, ending with more power to the European Parliament, more power to citizens, but also getting rid of the veto right. And I believe that also the question of the transnational list and the Spitzenkandidaten process is somehow participating to this. I would like also to say a few words, if I can, on the question, on the consequences of what is happening in Ukraine and Russia. And I would like to say that some of you, yes, some of you were with me in the European Parliament when we welcomed resistant people from Chechnya, when the Green Group welcomed Anna Politkovskaya to talk to us about what was happening and the awful events of the destruction in Grozny and in Chechnya. You were there, so you remember that. And you also remember that over the next, over some, after some years in the Sakharov Prize, we often talked about what happened in Russia and what Vladimir Putin was doing of what was then, still a relatively free place for press and for opposition. So we cannot really say today that we didn't know what Russia was becoming. And unfortunately, this idea that the economic interest and the economic integration would have resolved the problems or would have eased the issues of those authoritarian governments coming up was definitely wrong. That's why I fully support the fact that we don't agree with the Mercosur agreement and that we didn't go on with the China agreement, contrary to what Mrs. Merkel wanted. Because I think that unless, and this is what happens in Russia, unless we recognize that governance and democracy is at least as important as economic integration, we are going to be in front of very bad mistakes. And unfortunately, since we don't have the capacity to act because of what we said earlier, all of you said earlier, we are not even going to be able to help those who are actually fighting for their freedom. And I'm very proud as a former member of the European Parliament that indeed these issues were very clear to our institutions all the time. I want to remember that Orban came into power in 2010, and the first resolution of the European Parliament on the dismantling of the Hungarian democracy was in 2011. And in 2017, the European Parliament adopted with a very large majority a major reform of the Dublin regulation, which is not yet being discussed today by the Council. So I believe that all these things have to be somehow taken as lessons that, yes, the European Union is probably going forward with a crisis, but that in some cases, crises are actually making things worse. This was the case with the financial crisis that we had in 2008, 10, 11, etc. And I believe that the consequences of those teachings, let's say, is something that then brought to the New Generation EU and the Green Deal that today run the risk to be a little bit overwhelmed and not taken into account by wrong political decisions that are done by member states, which are still bound by the unanimity vote. Three very, very, very short conclusions. First, we really need to launch a large reform of the European Union, which should take into account the mistakes of not having been able to reform. Even if this reform is simply get rid of the veto right, get rid of the, increase the parliament vote and have larger transnational list, I would be very happy. But we need to go into that direction. And I believe that it is not enough to say, let's have getting rid of the unanimity vote simply for foreign and security affairs, because I think that it will be as difficult to get rid of the veto right for foreign and security than for economic and for budget and for everything. So let's go much larger on that. Second, and I think that Elmar addressed this point, and on that I fully agree with him, we are running the risk today to have a major arms race. I mean, I am very afraid of the member states saying that they suddenly want to reach 2% of the defense, when, as Elmar said, we are basically spending today 200 billion euros every year in defense expenses, but only about, less than 10% of these expenses are spent for cooperation in defense. Less than 10%, which means that you spend a lot for your national systems, but only less than 10% for cooperating with other countries. So it is not a question of quantities, it's a question of quality. And there again, we are stuck with the way in which the EU works, and we have to overcome it. Last point, I really believe that we have to do everything we can, and I don't believe that the Parliament has to be silent in this, in order to make sure that the Conference on the Future of Europe is not a failure. We are, and what does it mean? It means that the most important proposals of the European Union, of the Conference on the Future of Europe, have to be taken up. We are not yet there, and I am also not very sure that will be enough to say we are going to have a convention, because I want to remind everyone that the convention ends with an intergovernmental conference deciding by unanimity. And therefore, we are stuck once again. The convention was started to work without being included into the treaties. It didn't exist when it first started. So what we can say today is that we expect from the European Parliament a major step in understanding and listening what the citizens are doing, and also to launch this constitutional reform process that is long overdue, and that can also be limited to the 3 points I said earlier, but it must be something that has to be achieved. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to stop the Ukrainian war, but not any war, even the one that will come within our borders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica Frassoni. We turn to the last presentation, which is Alain Lamassoure. He's on the platform. Alain, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Congratulations for the event. I fully agree with the report summed up by Hans-Gert Pöttering and previous comments, particularly Alexander Stubbs. His strong statement was the conclusion. Let me complement them and complement my written contribution by a few comments in French, if you don't mind, instead of my shaky English. Le projet initial de conférence pour l'avenir de l'Europe a été lancé il y a maintenant 3 ans pour tirer les enseignements des crises qui nous ont frappés depuis plus de 10 ans. Et depuis sont intervenues d'autres crises encore plus graves, qui nous ont ramenés sur Terre. et fait comprendre ce qu'étaient les vrais défis du XXIe siècle. La leçon est rude, mais tout se passe comme si elle commence à être comprise depuis maintenant 2 ans, depuis 2019, à Bruxelles, comme dans toutes les capitales européennes. Pandémie, récession généralisée et même guerre, l'Union européenne n'avait pas de compétences directes sur de tels sujets. Elle a pourtant réagi de manière unanime, efficace et de plus en plus rapidement. Personne n'aurait imaginé Bruxelles, en l'espèce les institutions européennes et les chefs de gouvernement unanimes, capables d'une telle réactivité. Ces événements dramatiques ont eu aussi un effet pédagogique sur les citoyens européens, autant que sur les gouvernements. Et maintenant, le bon sens populaire a compris, face aux grands défis et aux incroyables imprévus de ce siècle, si l'Europe, l'Union n'est pas en première ligne, nous sommes tous condamnés à l'impuissance. Et donc, comme l'ont dit tous les intervenants, ce début des années 2020 ouvre clairement un nouveau chapitre de l'histoire européenne. Les conditions de température et de pression sont réunies, comme diraient les physiciens. Pour combien de temps? Mais le fait qu'elles soient réunies doit nous inciter à consolider ces nouveaux acquis et à lancer d'autres novations trop longtemps différées, telles que celles qui ont été abondamment présentées, notamment par Elmar Brok ou par Monica. 3 grands verrous ont sauté, des verrous qui bloquaient les progrès institutionnels. Profitons-en, allons plus loin. D'abord, le verrou financier sur le budget de l'Union. Personne ne le savait en dehors des institutions, mais il y avait une sorte de règle non écrite paralysant la politique européenne qui était l'accord tacite des gouvernements pour limiter le budget communautaire au niveau ridicule de 1% du GNI. Sachant en outre que les 2/3 du montant sont consacrés aux politiques traditionnelles de l'agriculture et du développement régional. C'est-à-dire qu'il reste bien peu pour des politiques nouvelles. Le Conseil européen prétendait, jusqu'à une période récente, conduire à partir de Bruxelles une politique mondiale financée par un pourboire de 1%. Mais voilà que les dettes nationales abyssales qui ont été creusées par les conséquences de la pandémie n'ont pu être supportées que grâce à un emprunt européen exceptionnel de 750 milliards d'euros. Le plafond historique des dépenses a ainsi sauté comme un bouchon de champagne. Pour garantir le service de l'emprunt, l'Union européenne commence enfin à se doter de nouvelles ressources fiscales propres. J'ai participé la semaine dernière à la semaine européenne parlementaire qui a débattu du sujet avec tous les parlements nationaux. Les tabous étant brisés, le grand débat politique doit maintenant s'ouvrir et plusieurs d'entre vous l'ont dit. Au-delà du sauvetage des budgets nationaux, qui est maintenant assuré, comment utiliser un tel niveau de ressources pour financer les nouvelles priorités d'aujourd'hui? Bien entendu, sécurité et défense, mais aussi la transition climatique, la révolution numérique, la recherche, la formation professionnelle, Erasmus, etc. Et aussi, comment soumettre enfin le budget commun à une vraie procédure parlementaire pour les ressources comme pour les dépenses, selon le principe « no taxation without representation ». Au lieu de répondre aux besoins du XXIe siècle, le budget de l'Union continue de répondre aux besoins de la fin du XXe siècle et il est adopté selon des procédures qui datent du XIXe ou même du XVIIIe siècle, à l'époque où le Parlement donnait un avis, mais où le roi décidait tout seul. Deuxième verrou historique, celui de la politique étrangère et de la défense. Cela a été excellemment présenté, notamment par notre cher Elmar Brok, 4 présidents américains successifs, 2 démocrates et 2 républicains, avaient clairement exprimé la priorité désormais donnée par Washington à la zone Pacifique sans être vraiment compris. Les orgues de Staline bombardant Kiev ont été plus éloquentes. Et la conversion spectaculaire de la nouvelle coalition allemande aux responsabilités internationales de l'Allemagne et à la cause de la défense européenne rend aujourd'hui possible un progrès qui était inimaginable jusque-là. Mais attention, la politique étrangère ne peut pas se décider à l'unanimité, mais elle ne peut pas non plus toujours se décider à la majorité. C'est à la fois plus simple et plus compliqué. En politique étrangère, il ne s'agit pas d'adopter une loi, il s'agit de prendre une décision d'application immédiate et parfois dans une urgence extrême. C'est d'ailleurs pourquoi dans aucune démocratie, la politique étrangère ne se décide au Parlement. Entre le moment où on détecte un missile balistique dirigé depuis la limite est du continent ou depuis un pays comme l'Iran, sur une grande ville d'Europe de l'Ouest, et le moment où ce missile touche sa cible, on dispose de 18 minutes. On ne peut pas décider à la majorité. Il nous faut inventer une procédure adaptée à la diplomatie dure, au temps de risque de guerre ou, hélas, au temps de guerre. Enfin, il y a le 3e verrou qui a sauté, qui est le verrou politique de la solidarité européenne. La guerre d'Ukraine a vu se manifester une extraordinaire solidarité de la part des gouvernements, mais surtout des citoyens de pays qui étaient les plus réticents jusque-là à accueillir des étrangers sur leur sol. Mais le dénouement de la guerre d'Ukraine décidera de notre propre foi en nos propres valeurs. Et là, je rejoins complètement ce qu'a dit Monica. Bien entendu, personne n'attend que nous fassions la guerre, nous, l'Union européenne ou ses membres, pour l'Ukraine. Mais nous détenons une arme plus puissante que les missiles hypersoniques de M. Poutine. Cette arme, ce n'est pas SWIFT, qu'on a eu raison de mettre en œuvre. Simplement, les sanctions décidées sont certes très puissantes, mais avant qu'elles ne fassent effet sur l'opinion russe et donc indirectement sur les dirigeants, il ne restera plus une seule maison debout en Ukraine. Ce sont nos achats de gaz et de pétrole qui financent les bombes qui s'abattent en ce moment sur Mariupol et sur Kiev. Si nous ne sommes pas capables de faire le sacrifice de réduire notre chauffage, d'économiser nos carburants, d'organiser une immense solidarité entre nos pays au profit de nos partenaires de l'Union les plus dépendants des approvisionnements russes, si nous restons ceux qui financent la destruction complète de l'Ukraine et le massacre de son peuple, cessons notre rhétorique qui sera alors devenue vide. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Alain. With this presentation, we conclude the debate, and I pass over to Teresa Vera Madurell for the conclusions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dieter. President Pottering, President of the Foundation, former President Enrique Baron, dear colleagues. It is my honor and pleasure to make few concluding remarks to this excellent and inspiring conference, although it's not very easy. In such a difficult time, let me also start by saying some positive things. Let me start by saying that it is really a joy to have been able to hold this event here in Florence at the EUI headquarters, listening and enjoying most of the speakers in person, which is a good sign that, at least in relation to the pandemic, we are we are returning to a more normal way of life. This fact brings me to a first idea that I think has permeated all today's discussions and interventions, which is the idea of moving forward and the importance of doing it together as Europeans. From today's contribution, it is clear once again that we all share the same values, that we all share the same determination to meet the challenges of our time and to master them. But it is also clear that in this crucial moment in which we face new threats, our commitment to values has to go hand in hand with the implementation of practical policies to address the challenges. It is what has been clearly mentioned by President Pottering as the need of the political will to give the EU the capacity to act, both in terms of rules and resources, to make the EU targets and also to meet the citizens' expectations in the European project. It is in that context that I believe the concept mentioned by President Rodriguez comes, the concept of European strategic autonomy, which can emerge as one of the main targets, gathering together many of the reflections and proposals made by today's speakers in different fields. Certainly, the recent crises, some of which are unfortunately still alive, have highlighted the urgent need, on one hand, to rethink many questions, as for instance, the enlargement mentioned by Professor Van Ecken, also our approach to our cultural diversity, mentioned by the president of the Martin Centers, or the economic model to reduce inequalities, mentioned by president of the Greens Foundation, and some, just to mention some of them, and also the urgent need to increase resilience and to reduce dependency from third countries, governments and companies in key strategic areas, such for instance, security and defense, of course, but also in technology, medicine, or energy, also in supply chains, and also in critical infrastructures, as Elman Brother also explained. According to Josep Borrell, strategic autonomy is for the EU a process of political survival, and it should be expanded beyond security and defense to safeguard our economy and strategic interests and European values. Also, Charles Michel clearly said that the strategic independence of Europe is our new common project for this century. According to all of this, progressing in fields like technology, digitalization, data control, cybersecurity, or clear energy production, and in values like democracy, as Professor Faisal and President Baron explained, or in reducing inequalities, as it was mentioned by President Rodriguez, is becoming crucial for our project. Fortunately, we have in our favor that even before the COVID crisis, the European Union was already on the path of fundamental transformations. We had already made, for instance, the decision to become the first carbon neutral continent by 2050. And we had adopted an ambitious digital agenda in line with our fundamental values. The pandemic has increased even more our determination to transform our economies and societies. And the recovery funds are being mainly invested in these three transitions that we have underway: the green, the digital, and the social, which will empower Europe to progress at a good rate in these crucial fields. As has been mentioned also, achieving a green strategic autonomy is something urgent. Our import of energy and critical raw materials have to be substantially reduced by building a full integrated and competitive EU energy market, based largely in renewable sources, and it has been also mentioned, and by taking ambitious energy efficiency measures, by supporting circular economy strategies, and by promoting efficient technologies in the use of both raw materials and energy. Moving to digital sovereignty is also of great importance, as President Rodriguez explains very well. That implies that the European Union has to free itself from dependencies on hardware and software from third countries, on both governments and high-tech companies, by developing crucial European technologies essential for the citizens' well-being, which in addition will allow the European Union to play a leading role in the world stage. By following this path, the European Union is clearly laying the foundations of its sovereignty, but not to be isolated, which would be against our interests, values, and culture. On the contrary, it is about reconciling strategic autonomy with the commitment to strategic openness and international cooperation that more than ever should be a priority, as Monica Frassoni certainly mentioned. And let me finish by saying that European values, written in Article 2 of the treaty, as many of the speakers already mentioned, should be mainstreamed in all actions taken by the European Union. And more than ever, we have to strongly defend fundamental values such as democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and the peaceful cooperation, which have to remain our guide in our way to pursue our interest. And just before finishing, let me, I like to thank my colleague Monica Baldi and Dieter Slenker and all those that make possible this conference, with which we jointly like to contribute to the debate for the future of Europe. And from now, dear colleagues and friends, let's just move in the direction to make reality as soon as possible the hopes we have heard from our speakers today, as the future of Europe starts today. Thank you very much.
With this, I'm pleased to conclude this conference. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Thanks for the participants. Thanks for the FMA Association for having organized this discussion. Thanks to the foundations for their voices and their contributions, and also to the EUI members, obviously our colleagues and other colleagues. Thanks for your input and your participation. Have a good evening and see you soon again. Thank you very much.